Most people are not in control of their lives. They are in control of their emotions. One comment ruins their mood. One setback destroys their focus. One difficult moment changes their behavior completely. That is weakness. Not because they feel emotion, but because emotion controls them. This audiobook is not about becoming cold. It is about becoming dangerous through control. Because the person who controls their emotions controls their decisions. And the person who controls their decisions controls their life. Over the next few chapters, you will learn how to stay calm under pressure, silent in chaos, disciplined in discomfort, and emotionally unshakable in situations that break most people. Let's begin. Most people believe they are thinking clearly. They are not. They are reacting emotionally and calling it logic afterward. That is what happens when emotions control your decisions. You justify impulses. You defend reactions. You convince yourself that emotional behavior was necessary. But reactive people surrender power. Always. Think about how many decisions people make emotionally every single day. They send the angry message. They quit too early. They spend money to feel better. They argue to protect their ego. They chase validation because silence makes them uncomfortable. Then later, when the emotion fades, regret appears. Because emotions are temporary, but the consequences of emotional decisions are often permanent. That is the problem. Your emotions are not the enemy. Your lack of control is. That is the key. Strong people feel emotion too. They feel anger. They feel jealousy. They feel insecurity. They feel fear. The difference is simple. They do not automatically obey what they feel. Most people do. Someone disrespects them and they explode. Someone ignores them and they become desperate. Someone criticizes them and their confidence collapses. That is not emotional honesty. That is emotional dependence. And emotional dependence makes people weak. You have a choice. Every emotional reaction contains a moment, small but powerful, where control can either be taken or surrendered. Most people surrender it instantly because they never trained themselves to pause. That pause changes everything. Imagine someone sends you a disrespectful message. An untrained mind reacts immediately. The heart rate rises. The ego gets involved. The fingers move faster. Now they are typing emotionally instead of thinking clearly. They want to win the moment. They want emotional relief. They want the last word. But reactive people surrender power. Because once emotion takes control, intelligence disappears. Now compare that to someone emotionally disciplined. They still feel anger. But they pause. They breathe once. Maybe twice. They slow the moment down. Now emotion is present, but emotion is no longer leading. That is emotional control. Not suppression. Regulation. There is a difference. Suppression means pretending you do not feel anything. Regulation means refusing to let feelings dictate behavior. That is strength. A lot of people misunderstand emotional mastery because movies and social media taught them the wrong definition of power. They think power is intensity, loud voices, aggression, dominance. No. Real power is remaining steady when emotions are trying to pull you in every direction. That is rare. Anyone can lose control. Anyone can react. Anyone can scream, blame, threaten, or collapse emotionally. That requires no discipline. But staying calm, staying measured, staying grounded while pressure rises, that is training. Your emotions are not the enemy. Your lack of control is. Remember that. Look at how emotions silently shape behavior. Anger destroys relationships. Fear delays opportunities. Insecurity creates validation seeking. Loneliness creates desperation. Embarrassment creates avoidance. Most people are not living intentionally. They are emotionally drifting from one reaction to the next. That is why their lives feel unstable. Their mood controls their behavior, and their behavior controls their outcomes. One bad day ruins their discipline. One rejection ruins their confidence. One emotional moment ruins months of progress. Because they built their life on feelings instead of standards. You cannot build stability on emotional instability. That's the key. You need standards stronger than your mood. You need rules that exist regardless of how you feel. For example, I do not make decisions while angry. I do not beg for attention. I do not respond emotionally under pressure. I do not abandon discipline because of discomfort. These standards protect your life from emotional chaos. Without standards, emotion becomes the leader. And emotions are inconsistent leaders. This becomes obvious in relationships. How many people destroy good relationships because they cannot regulate emotion? They react instead of communicating. They accuse instead of listening. They threaten instead of thinking. They chase instead of respecting themselves. Then later, when the emotional storm passes, clarity returns. But sometimes the damage is already done. One emotional reaction can destroy years of trust. That is why emotional control matters. Not just for success, for survival. People think emotional weakness only affects dramatic moments. It doesn't. It affects ordinary moments constantly. The impulse purchase, the emotional eating, the procrastination, the need to check your phone every few minutes, the inability to sit in silence. All of it comes from the same place. Discomfort controls behavior. Most people cannot tolerate emotional discomfort for even a few minutes without trying to escape it. That is why discipline feels difficult to them. Discipline requires emotional tolerance. You have to tolerate boredom without distraction, stress without collapsing, fear without avoidance, criticism without emotional breakdown. And that ability changes your life. Because once emotions stop controlling behavior, clarity appears. Now you stop making emotional decisions. Now you stop sabotaging yourself. Now you stop giving temporary feelings permanent authority. That is transformation. You do not need to become emotionless. You do not need to become cold. You need to become stable. Stable under pressure. Stable during uncertainty. Stable when emotions rise. Because emotional stability creates behavioral consistency. And behavioral consistency creates results. This is why emotionally controlled people seem powerful even when they say very little. Their energy feels grounded. Their reactions are slower. Their decisions are cleaner. Their presence feels calm. Why? Because they are not emotionally leaking everywhere. Most people are. You can hear it in how they talk. See it in how they react. Feel it in how quickly they lose composure. Emotional people are easy to manipulate because their triggers are visible. A controlled person is harder to move emotionally, harder to provoke, harder to destabilize. That is power. And the beautiful part is this. Emotional control is trainable. You are not just an emotional person. That is an excuse people use to avoid discipline. You can train your breathing, train your reactions, train your self-talk, train your patience, train your nervous system. You have a choice. Every single emotional moment is training. Traffic is training. Criticism is training. Delays are training. Conflict is training. Rejection is training. Life constantly gives you opportunities to strengthen emotional control. Most people waste them by reacting automatically. Don't be one of them. The next time emotion rises, pause. Not because emotions are bad, but because emotions should not be in charge. Feel the emotion without obeying it immediately. That is the beginning of self-control. And self-control changes everything. Because once you control your emotions stop controlling your life. That is where real power begins. You now understand the foundation. Reactive people surrender power. Controlled people protect it. But emotional control requires something even deeper than awareness. It requires the ability to stop reacting automatically to everything around you. And that is exactly where we are going next. Most people are emotionally available to everything. Every comment affects them. Every opinion reaches them. Every inconvenience changes their mood. Every moment of disrespect pulls them into reaction. That is exhausting. And worse than exhausting, it is weak. Because every reaction gives your power away. Remember that. Every emotional reaction is an admission that something outside of you gained control over something inside of you. A stranger online says something disrespectful. Now your mood changes. A coworker criticizes you. Now your confidence shakes. Someone ignores your message. Now anxiety takes over your thoughts. Every reaction gives your power away. That is the key. Most people think reactivity is personality. It's just how I am. No one disrespects me. I'm emotional. No. Emotional reactions are habits. And habits can be trained. You were not born reacting instantly to everything. You trained yourself into it through repetition. React. Defend. Explain. Attack. Overthink. Repeat. Eventually it became automatic. Now your nervous system reacts before your mind has time to think. That is dangerous, because emotional speed creates emotional mistakes. Think about how many problems in life were caused by reacting too quickly. The angry text, the impulsive decision, the emotional argument, the public outburst, the social media fight, the breakup that could have been prevented. All emotional speed. People think speed looks powerful. It usually looks unstable. Controlled people move differently. They slow the moment down. That's the difference. Someone insults them. They pause. Someone criticizes them unfairly. They observe first. Someone tries to provoke them emotionally. They refuse urgency. That refusal changes everything. Because every reaction gives your power away. And emotionally intelligent people understand this deeply. They understand that not every comment deserves a response. Not every opinion deserves attention. Not every situation deserves emotional energy. Most people drain themselves fighting battles that never mattered. Battles online. Battles in conversations. Battles in their own imagination. Always reacting. Always proving. Always defending. That behavior destroys peace. You do not need to attend every emotional invitation you receive. Read that again mentally. You do not need to attend every emotional invitation you receive. Someone wants your anger. You have a choice. Someone wants your insecurity. You have a choice. Someone wants your emotional reaction because your reaction gives them attention, validation, or control. You still have a choice. That pause between stimulus and response is where power lives. Most people never develop it. That is why they remain emotionally predictable. And predictable people are easy to manipulate. If someone knows exactly what will trigger you, they control you emotionally before the interaction even begins. That is not strength. Strength is emotional discipline. Strength is remaining calm when reaction would be easier. Strength is silence when emotion wants noise. That is the pause principle. The pause principle is simple. When emotion rises, delay reaction. Not forever. Just long enough to regain control. Slow your breathing. Relax your shoulders. Lower the urgency. Observe instead of immediately acting. This sounds simple. But under pressure, it changes everything. Because emotional urgency creates bad decisions. People say things they regret because they felt urgency. People quit too early because they felt urgency. People destroy opportunities because they felt urgency. Urgency is emotional pressure disguised as importance. But not everything is urgent. Sometimes your emotions are loud simply because your ego feels threatened. That is not the same as danger. Someone disagreeing with you is not danger. Someone criticizing you is not danger. Someone misunderstanding you is not danger. But reactive minds treat all discomfort like an emergency. That's why they explode emotionally. Controlled minds stay grounded. And grounded people see clearly. This becomes especially important in conflict. Most arguments escalate because both people are reacting emotionally at the same time. One raises their voice. The other raises theirs higher. One becomes defensive. The other becomes aggressive. Now nobody is thinking clearly. Two nervous systems are fighting for control. Reactive people escalate situations. Controlled people stabilize them. That is emotional leadership. And emotional leadership is rare. Imagine being the only calm person in a stressful room. Everyone else is emotional. Everyone else is reactive. Everyone else is speaking impulsively. But you remain measured. Your breathing stays controlled. Your tone stays calm. Your words stay intentional. Who has the real power in that situation? The loudest person? No. The calmest person. Always. Because calm people think while emotional people react. That's the key. This is why silence is often more powerful than expression. Most people talk because they are uncomfortable emotionally. They explain too much, defend too much, argue too much, overshare too much. Why? Because silence feels emotionally uncomfortable to them. But silence is not weakness. Silence is restraint. And restraint is power under control. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is say nothing. Not because you are afraid. Because you are disciplined. There is a massive difference. Reactive people need immediate release. Controlled people tolerate temporary discomfort. That tolerance creates stability. For example, someone disrespects you publicly. An emotional person reacts immediately because they cannot tolerate the discomfort of not responding. But a disciplined person pauses first. They ask themselves, what response actually improves this situation? That question changes behavior instantly, because now they are thinking strategically instead of emotionally. You have a choice. That phrase matters more than you realize. You have a choice when anger rises. You have a choice when insecurity appears. You have a choice when someone tries to provoke you. Most people act like emotions remove choice. They don't. They only remove awareness. Training restores awareness. And awareness restores control. That is why emotional discipline must become daily practice. Not theory. Practice. Practice during traffic. Practice during delays. Practice during criticism. Practice during frustration. Practice during awkward silence. Small moments train your nervous system for bigger moments. Most people wait for major life situations before trying to become emotionally strong. That is too late. Emotional control is built in ordinary moments. Every pause strengthens discipline. Every delayed reaction strengthens awareness. Every calm response strengthens identity. Over time, something shifts. You stop reacting automatically. You stop needing the last word. You stop proving yourself emotionally. You stop letting temporary feelings control permanent decisions. Now you become harder to manipulate, harder to provoke, harder to destabilize. That is emotional maturity. And emotional maturity changes your entire life. Because when people realize they cannot easily control your emotions, your presence changes. You appear calmer, more confident, more grounded, not because life became easier, because your reactions became disciplined. Every reaction gives your power away. Never forget that. The goal is not to become emotionless. The goal is to become intentional. Intentional with words. Intentional with energy. Intentional with reactions. That is the difference between emotional weakness and emotional control. And once you stop reacting to everything, something powerful begins to happen. You stop allowing the world to control your internal state. Now you are ready for the next level. Because emotional control is not just about reducing reactions. It is about developing calm so deep that pressure itself stops controlling you. Most people misunderstand calmness. They think calm is passive, soft, weak. It is not. Calmness is control. And the calmest person usually has the most control. Remember that. In every difficult situation, people unconsciously look for emotional stability. In conflict, in leadership, in negotiations, in relationships, in pressure. The person who remains steady changes the entire atmosphere of the room. That is power. Not loud power. Not aggressive power. Controlled power. Most people lose control of themselves long before they lose control of the situation. Pressure rises. Their breathing changes. Their tone sharpens. Their posture tightens. Their thoughts speed up. Now emotion is leading. And once emotion leads, clarity disappears. That is why emotional people make emotional decisions. They react too quickly, speak too quickly, defend too quickly, quit too quickly. But the calmest person usually has the most control. That's the key. Look at any high-pressure situation. A negotiation. One person becomes desperate. They rush. They oversell. They talk too much because silence makes them nervous. The other person stays calm. They pause before answering. They speak slowly. They observe more than they react. Who controls the negotiation? The calm person. Always. Because calmness creates leverage. The same thing happens in arguments. One person becomes emotional. Their voice gets louder. Their words become impulsive. Their body language becomes unstable. The other person remains grounded. Calm breathing. Relaxed posture. Measured tone. Who appears stronger? The calm person. Not because they are pretending. Because emotional steadiness communicates confidence automatically. People trust stability. That is human psychology. When someone remains calm under pressure, the nervous systems around them begin responding to that energy. That is why calm leaders change rooms without saying much. Their emotional control affects everyone around them. Most people try to control situations externally. Few people realize real control starts internally. If you cannot control your nervous system, pressure will control it for you. That's why calmness must become a skill. Not luck. Not personality. Training. You have a choice. Every stressful moment gives you two paths. The first path is emotional speed. React immediately. Tighten your body. Raise your voice. Rush your decisions. That path feels powerful in the moment, but it usually creates regret later. The second path is deliberate calm. Slow down. Observe first. Breathe deeply. Reduce urgency. That path feels uncomfortable initially because your ego wants immediate emotional release. But long-term power belongs to the person who controls themselves first. The calmest person usually has the most control. Never forget that. This becomes especially important in relationships. Think about breakups. Most people lose themselves emotionally, begging, pleading, over-explaining, chasing reassurance. Why? Because emotional instability creates desperation. Desperation destroys respect. But emotionally disciplined people behave differently. They still feel pain, still feel sadness, still feel loss, but they remain composed. Not because they do not care, because they refuse to collapse emotionally. That changes everything. Calmness protects dignity, and dignity protects self-respect. Self-respect matters because people treat you differently when your emotions are stable. A calm person appears trustworthy, grounded, competent, confident, even before they speak. Why? Because the body communicates emotional state before words ever do. That is why physical control matters so much. Emotional control begins physically before it becomes mental. That's the key. Most people try to calm the mind while the body is still panicking. That never works. The body must relax first. Slow breathing. Relaxed jaw. Lower shoulders. Stable posture. Controlled tone of voice. These are not small details. They are signals. Signals to your nervous system that say, we are safe. We are in control. Once the body stabilizes, the mind follows. That is why breathing matters during pressure. Fast breathing creates urgency. Slow breathing creates control. Most people never notice how quickly their breathing changes under stress. But controlled people do. They train awareness. The moment tension rises, they slow themselves down physically before emotion accelerates mentally. That interruption changes behavior completely. Imagine someone insulting you publicly. An emotional person reacts instantly because their nervous system already feels threatened. But a trained person slows down first. One breath, then another. Now the body is calmer. The mind is clearer. Now they can choose a response instead of obeying an impulse. That is emotional mastery. And emotional mastery creates authority. Not fake authority. Real authority. The kind people feel immediately. You can see this in leadership. Weak leaders spread panic because they absorb pressure emotionally. Strong leaders stabilize pressure because they regulate themselves first. When chaos appears, weak leaders become reactive. Strong leaders become slower, calmer, more deliberate. Because they understand something important. People mirror emotional energy. If you panic, others panic. If you remain grounded, others stabilize. That is influence. And influence belongs to emotionally controlled people. The calmest person usually has the most control. That sentence applies everywhere. At work, at home, in conflict, in business, during uncertainty. Calmness is not the absence of emotion. It is emotional discipline under pressure. That is different. You do not need to become emotionless. You need to become difficult to destabilize. Most people are emotionally fragile. A small inconvenience ruins their day. A disagreement ruins their mood. A delayed response creates anxiety. That fragility creates inconsistency. And inconsistent people struggle to build stable lives. Because emotional instability leaks into everything. Work, relationships, decisions, habits, communication, everything. That is why calmness is a competitive advantage. Emotionally steady people think more clearly, recover faster, communicate better, lead more effectively, make cleaner decisions under pressure. While everyone else is emotionally overwhelmed, they remain functional. That difference compounds over time. Most people underestimate how much emotional control changes outcomes. One calm conversation saves a relationship. One calm decision prevents disaster. One calm response preserves respect. Calmness changes direction. And calmness is trainable. You train it through repetition, not in perfect conditions. In stressful ones. Traffic is training. Conflict is training. Silence is training. Discomfort is training. Every difficult moment gives you another opportunity to strengthen your nervous system. You have a choice. React emotionally, or regulate intentionally. That choice becomes identity over time. Eventually people begin describing you differently. Stable, composed, grounded, reliable. Not because life became easier, because you became calmer. And calm people control rooms long before they control outcomes. But calmness alone is not enough. Because even emotionally steady people can still lose themselves when their mood depends on other people. That is the next level of emotional control. Learning how to stop giving external people control over your internal state. Most people wake up emotionally neutral. Then the world touches their emotions and completely changes their state. One text ruins their mood. One opinion destroys their confidence. One rejection changes their entire day. One stranger online controls their emotions for hours. That is dangerous. Because if they can control your emotions, they control you. That's the key. Read that carefully in your mind. If they can control your emotions, they control you. Most people do not realize how emotionally dependent they have become. They need approval to feel valuable, attention to feel important, validation to feel confident, reassurance to feel calm. Without those things, they collapse inward emotionally. That is not confidence. That is dependence disguised as self-worth. Real emotional strength is internal. It does not disappear because someone ignored you. rejected you, criticized you, disagreed with you. But most people build identity socially instead of internally. And that creates emotional instability. Because social approval changes constantly. One day people praise you. The next day they criticize you. One moment you are included. The next moment you are ignored. If your emotional state depends on those fluctuations, your life will always feel unstable. That is why emotionally dependent people are constantly anxious. They are monitoring reactions all day long. Who texted back? Who viewed the story? Who liked the post? Who approved? Who disapproved? Their attention is trapped outside themselves. That destroys peace. You have a choice. You can continue giving strangers emotional authority over your internal state. Or you can reclaim control. Most people never reclaim it because they confuse attention with value. They believe being noticed means being important. That is why social media affects emotions so deeply. One post performs badly and confidence drops. One negative comment ruins the mood. One comparison creates insecurity. Because identity became external. And external identity is fragile. Stable people build identity internally. That changes everything. They do not need constant praise to feel worthy. They do not need constant reassurance to feel secure. They do not need everyone's approval to trust themselves. You don't need their permission. That sentence matters more than most people realize. You do not need permission to feel valuable. You do not need permission to feel confident. You do not need permission to believe in yourself. Most people are waiting emotionally for someone else to approve their existence. That is why rejection hurts them so deeply. Rejection attacks the identity they placed in external validation. But emotionally independent people think differently. They understand something important. Rejection is information, not identity. Someone not choosing you does not reduce your value. Someone criticizing you does not define your worth. Someone misunderstanding you does not erase your character. But emotionally dependent minds personalize everything. That's why they suffer constantly. They absorb every opinion emotionally. And once other people's opinions begin controlling your emotions, your direction disappears. Because now your behavior changes depending on who approves. You become a performer instead of a person. You speak differently around different people. Hide parts of yourself for acceptance. Avoid honesty to avoid rejection. Suppress authenticity to maintain approval. That creates emotional exhaustion. Why? Because pretending is exhausting. Trying to manage everyone's perception is exhausting. And it never works permanently anyway. Someone will always misunderstand you, dislike you, judge you, reject you. That is life. Emotionally strong people accept this early. Emotionally weak people spend years fighting reality. You don't need their permission. Not to grow. Not to improve. Not to move forward. Not to become disciplined. Not to become emotionally strong. That's the key. Your life changes when you stop emotionally negotiating with other people's opinions. Look at how many people stay trapped because they fear judgment. They want to start the business, post the content, speak honestly, change their life, leave the toxic relationship, but fear of external reaction controls them. Again, if they can control your emotions, they control you. That is why emotional independence is freedom. Freedom from needing applause. Freedom from needing constant reassurance. Freedom from emotional slavery to public opinion. Most people never experience this freedom because they train themselves to seek validation daily. Post something. Check reactions. Wait emotionally. Repeat. Now dopamine and self-worth become connected. That creates emotional addiction. An emotionally addicted person is never stable. Their emotions rise and fall based on external feedback. That is not confidence. Confidence is internal consistency. You trust yourself even when others doubt you. You remain grounded even when others misunderstand you. And once emotional dependence disappears, something powerful begins to replace it. Discipline. Because emotionally strong people stop asking, "How do I feel?" and start asking, "What needs to be done?" That shift changes lives. You continue forward even when nobody claps for you. That is emotional independence. And emotional independence creates emotional peace. You stop overchecking your phone. Stop obsessing over responses. Stop overanalyzing silence. Stop personalizing everything. Why? Because your nervous system no longer depends on external reassurance to feel safe. That changes relationships too. Emotionally dependent people become controlling because they are afraid internally. They need constant reassurance, constant attention, constant proof. But no amount of external reassurance permanently fixes internal insecurity. That's the truth. An insecure mind will always demand more validation. That is why emotional work must happen internally first. You have to build self-respect privately, not through popularity, not through attention, not through performance. Privately, through discipline, through consistency, through integrity, through keeping promises to yourself. That is how real confidence forms. Not from applause, from evidence. You become emotionally stable when your identity is built on your actions instead of other people's reactions. That is a completely different life. Now criticism affects you differently. You listen without collapsing emotionally. You learn without personalizing everything. You separate feedback from identity. That separation is maturity. Emotionally immature people hear criticism as emotional attack. Emotionally strong people ask, "Is there something useful here?" That question protects growth. Because emotional independence allows objectivity. You stop treating discomfort like destruction. And this matters deeply in modern life because the world constantly tries to pull your attention outward. Notifications, opinions, comparison, validation loops, approval addiction, all designed to control your emotional state. You must protect your mind intentionally. Protect your attention. Protect your peace. Protect your emotional energy. Not everyone deserves access to your nervous system. That is emotional discipline. Stable people are selective emotionally. They do not absorb everything. They do not react to everyone. They do not chase acceptance from people who cannot even accept themselves. That is power. And power grows when your emotions become internally anchored instead of externally controlled. If they can control your emotions, they control you. Never forget that. Your goal is not to become cold. Your goal is to become emotionally self-sufficient, able to feel emotion without depending on external approval to regulate it. That changes your presence, your confidence, your relationships, your decisions. Everything becomes steadier. Most people are controlled by feelings. They wake up and immediately ask themselves a dangerous question. How do I feel today? That question destroys consistency, because feelings change constantly. Some days you feel motivated. Some days you feel tired. Some days you feel focused. Some days you feel emotionally heavy. If your actions depend on those fluctuations, your life will become unstable. That is why weak people wait to feel ready, and readiness rarely comes. That's the trap. People think successful individuals feel motivated all the time. They don't. They simply train themselves to act whether motivation exists or not. That is discipline. Discipline means your standards stay consistent even when your emotions do not. That's the key. Weak people wait for emotional permission. Strong people follow standards. Look at how most people approach difficult tasks. They want to wake up early, but they don't feel like it. They want to train their body, but they feel tired. They want to work on their goals, but stress makes them emotionally distracted. So they delay action. Then they repeat the same cycle tomorrow. And slowly, without realizing it, they train themselves into weakness. Because every time comfort wins, discipline loses authority. That matters more than most people understand. Your brain is always learning from your behavior. When you consistently obey comfort, your mind begins associating discomfort with avoidance. Now discipline feels harder every week. Not because the task changed, because your standards weakened. Weak people wait to feel ready. Disciplined people move anyway. That difference changes everything. You have a choice. When the alarm goes off early in the morning, you have a choice. Obey comfort, or obey your standards. When boredom appears during difficult work, you have a choice. Seek distraction, or continue despite discomfort. When stress enters your life, you have a choice. Collapse emotionally, or remain committed to your responsibilities. Discipline is built in those moments, not during motivation, during resistance. Most people misunderstand discipline completely. They think discipline is punishment, restriction, suffering, misery. No, discipline is freedom. Freedom from emotional chaos. Freedom from inconsistency. Freedom from constantly starting over. Think about how exhausting it is to live emotionally. Motivated 1 week. Lost the next. Focused 1 month. Distracted the next. Strong during easy seasons. Standards. That is emotional strength in action. But discipline becomes even more powerful when your inner voice begins supporting your standards instead of sabotaging them. Because most people are not destroyed by the world first. They are destroyed internally. Broken during stressful ones. That instability destroys momentum. Discipline removes instability. Why? Because discipline reduces negotiation. You stop debating with yourself emotionally every day. You already decided who you are. That's the key. A disciplined person does not wake up every morning deciding whether to stay consistent. Consistency is already the standard. They act first. Feelings come second. That order matters. Most people reverse it. They wait to feel motivated before acting. But action creates momentum. Momentum creates energy. Energy creates motivation. Not the other way around. That is why discipline creates emotional stability. Action removes overthinking. Most anxiety comes from avoidance. Avoiding difficult conversations. Avoiding responsibility. Avoiding discomfort. Avoiding action. Now the mind becomes trapped in endless thinking. Overthinking grows because movement stopped. Disciplined people interrupt this cycle quickly. They move before emotions become overwhelming. Not recklessly. Consistently. That consistency builds trust internally. And self-trust changes your entire emotional state. When you trust yourself to follow through, confidence becomes quieter and stronger. You stop needing motivation speeches. Stop needing emotional hype. Stop needing perfect conditions. Because you already know something important. You are going to act regardless. That certainty creates stability. Weak people wait to feel ready. Strong people train themselves to move before they feel ready. There is a massive difference. Most people are addicted to comfort. Comfortable food. Comfortable routines. Comfortable distractions. Comfortable excuses. But comfort destroys growth when it becomes authority. Because growth feels uncomfortable. Discipline feels uncomfortable. Training feels uncomfortable. Repetition feels uncomfortable. Consistency feels uncomfortable. At first. That is normal. Your nervous system resists change naturally. But resistance is not danger. Resistance is training. That mindset changes everything. Now discomfort stops feeling like a signal to quit. Instead, it becomes evidence that growth is happening. You have a choice. Every uncomfortable moment asks the same question. Will comfort lead your life, or will standards lead your life? Most people choose comfort repeatedly. Then later they complain about their results. But results follow behavior. And behavior follows standards. Not feelings. That's the truth most people avoid. No one becomes emotionally strong accidentally. No one builds discipline accidentally. It is repetition. Repeated actions. Repeated restraint. Repeated consistency. That is how identity changes. You stop seeing yourself as someone who tries. Now you become someone who follows through. That identity shift is powerful, because disciplined people behave differently under pressure. Stress enters their life, but they still show up. They still train, still work, still maintain standards. Why? Because discipline is not emotional. It is structural. That is why disciplined people appear calmer. Their life is not constantly controlled by emotional weather. They understand feelings are temporary, but standards must remain stable. That creates peace internally. No more emotional bargaining. No more constant excuses. No more waiting for perfect conditions. Just execution. And execution creates momentum. Momentum creates confidence. Confidence creates emotional stability. Again, discipline creates emotional stability because action removes overthinking. That is the key. Look at people who constantly procrastinate. Their minds are chaotic. Why? Because avoided responsibilities create mental pressure. The longer they delay action, the heavier everything feels emotionally. Disciplined people avoid this trap by acting quickly and consistently. Not perfectly. Consistently. Perfection is not the goal. Reliability is. That is what discipline actually builds. Reliability under pressure. Reliability during stress. Reliability during discomfort. And reliable people become emotionally stronger because they trust themselves. You don't need their permission. Not to become disciplined. Not to improve your habits. Not to change your life. Most people wait emotionally for someone else to push them. A mentor. A motivational video. A perfect moment. But real transformation begins when discipline becomes self-directed. When you stop needing emotional excitement to move forward. That is maturity. Emotionally immature people ask, "What do I feel like doing today?" Emotionally disciplined people ask, "What needs to be done?" That single shift changes outcomes completely. Because life rewards consistency more than intensity. Anyone can work hard temporarily. Very few people can remain disciplined when excitement disappears. That is why discipline is rare. And rare qualities create rare results. Weak people wait to feel ready. Do not become one of them. Train yourself to move regardless of mood, regardless of fear, regardless of emotional resistance. Because once discipline becomes stronger than comfort, your life changes direction permanently. Now you stop being controlled by feelings and start being guided by. Most people are defeated internally long before life defeats them externally. That is the truth. Before they quit physically, they quit mentally. Before confidence collapses publicly, it collapses privately. Before discipline disappears externally, it weakens internally first. Why? Because your mind is listening to everything you say. Every thought, every label, every emotional sentence repeated daily. Your mind is listening. That's the key. Most people speak to themselves in ways they would never speak to someone they love. I always fail. I'm not good enough. This is impossible. I'll never change. Everyone else is better than me. Then they wonder why their confidence disappears under pressure. Your mind is listening to everything you say. And eventually, repetition becomes identity. That is how self-talk works. The brain believes what it hears repeatedly, especially under emotion. If you constantly speak to yourself with defeat, weakness becomes familiar. If you constantly speak to yourself with chaos, your nervous system stays unstable. Most people are emotionally poisoning themselves all day long through language. They catastrophize everything. One mistake becomes, "My life is ruined." One rejection becomes, "Nobody will ever want me." One bad day becomes, "I'm falling apart." That language destroys emotional control. Because emotional exaggeration creates emotional suffering. It is not about the problem first. It is about the interpretation. That's the key. Two people can experience the same setback and react completely differently. One person says, "This is difficult, but I'll handle it." The other says, "This always happens to me. I can't deal with this." Same situation. Different inner voice. Different emotional outcome. Your inner voice shapes your emotional reality. That is why controlling self-talk is one of the most important forms of emotional discipline. You have a choice. You can continue feeding your mind emotional chaos, or you can train your inner voice to become stable, clear, and directive. Most people never train it. They allow random thoughts to dominate their nervous system all day long. Fear, insecurity, comparison, victim thinking, self-criticism. Now their emotional state becomes unstable automatically. And unstable minds make unstable decisions. That affects everything. Relationships, discipline, confidence, performance, recovery after failure. Everything. Look at how people talk to themselves after rejection. An emotionally undisciplined mind says, "I'm not attractive enough. I'll always be abandoned. There must be something wrong with me." Now rejection becomes identity. That destroys confidence. But emotionally strong people separate events from identity. That is emotional maturity. They say, "That hurt, but I'm still moving forward." Notice the difference. One voice creates collapse. The other creates direction. Your mind is listening to everything you say. Never forget that. This becomes even more dangerous during failure. Failure already creates emotional discomfort naturally. But weak self-talk multiplies the suffering. Instead of learning from mistakes, people attack themselves emotionally. "I'm useless. I ruin everything. I'm not capable." That language weakens action immediately, because the mind follows instructions. That is why self-talk must become intentional, not emotional. Intentional. Most people speak emotionally, emotionally exaggerated, emotionally dramatic, emotionally impulsive. Strong people speak directionally. That is different. Instead of saying, "I'm overwhelmed," they say, "Handle the next step." Instead of saying, "I can't do this," they say, "This is uncomfortable, but manageable." Instead of saying, "My life is falling apart," they say, "Focus on what can be controlled right now." That shift changes emotional outcomes immediately, because self-talk becomes instruction instead of emotional chaos. That's the key. The goal is not fake positivity. The goal is emotional accuracy. Strong self-talk is calm, measured, grounded, directive, not dramatic. Weak minds dramatize everything, and drama creates emotional exhaustion. Do not eliminate difficulty. They eliminate internal chaos during difficulty. That is emotional mastery. And once your inner voice becomes disciplined, something powerful begins to happen. Pain stops feeling like destruction. Now pain becomes training. Most people are tired not because life is impossible, but because their inner voice never stops creating emotional pressure. Constant fear, constant judgment, constant negativity, constant self-attack. That drains energy. You cannot build emotional stability while mentally attacking yourself every day. It is impossible. That is why emotional discipline begins internally first. You must become aware of your mental language. Notice how you speak during stress. Notice how you speak after mistakes. Notice how you speak during rejection. Awareness is the beginning of control. You have a choice. A thought appears. You do not automatically have to obey it. That matters. Most people believe every thought emotionally. That is dangerous. Not every thought is true. Not every emotion is accurate. Not every fear deserves authority. But untrained minds never question internal narratives. Now anxiety becomes identity. Fear becomes personality. Insecurity becomes lifestyle. All because the inner voice remained unchallenged. That is why mentally strong people interrupt destructive thinking early. They notice exaggeration. They notice victim language. They notice emotional spirals. And they redirect quickly. Not with fantasy. With discipline. For example, instead of, "Everything is going wrong," they say, "What needs attention right now?" Instead of, "I'm a failure," they say, "That result was poor. Adjust and continue." That language creates emotional stability because it separates identity from temporary outcomes. That separation changes everything. Failure stops becoming personal destruction. Criticism stops becoming emotional collapse. Embarrassment stops becoming permanent identity. Now the mind stays functional during pressure. That is emotional strength. Your inner voice also affects your body physically. Negative self-talk increases tension, fear, stress, anxiety. The nervous system responds to internal language as if danger is present. That is why catastrophic thinking creates physical exhaustion. but grounded self-talk stabilizes the body. Slow language, calm language, clear language. Now the nervous system relaxes. That is why emotionally disciplined people recover faster from setbacks. Their inner voice prevents emotional spirals. They feel emotion without becoming consumed by it. That difference is life-changing. You don't need their permission. Not to believe in yourself. Not to speak to yourself differently. Not to rebuild your identity. Most people inherited weak mental language from environments filled with fear, criticism, insecurity, or emotional chaos. But inherited patterns are not permanent patterns. You can retrain your mind. One sentence at a time. One interruption at a time. One disciplined response at a time. That repetition matters. Because eventually the inner voice changes automatically. Now pressure appears and the mind responds differently. Calmer. Stronger. More directive. Now instead of emotional panic, your inner voice asks, "What is the next move?" That question creates control. And control changes everything. Because emotionally strong people. Most people think pain is a sign to stop. That belief keeps them weak. The moment life becomes uncomfortable, they escape, distract themselves, numb themselves, avoid the situation completely. Why? Because discomfort scares them emotionally. But emotionally strong people understand something most people never learn. Pressure reveals your level of training. That's the key. Pressure does not create weakness. It exposes it. When heartbreak happens, your training is exposed. When rejection happens, your training is exposed. When uncertainty appears, your training is exposed. When life becomes painful, your emotional habits become visible immediately. That is why difficult moments matter so much. They show you who is really in control, you or your emotions. Most people spend their lives trying to avoid pain. But avoiding pain also avoids growth. Because emotional resilience is built through exposure, not escape. That truth changes everything. Look at heartbreak. Most people collapse emotionally after losing someone. Not because sadness is wrong. Sadness is normal. The collapse happens because they cannot tolerate emotional discomfort without trying to escape it immediately. So they chase distractions, rebound emotionally, beg for reassurance, obsess over the past, destroy their dignity trying to remove pain quickly. But emotionally disciplined people approach pain differently. They stay present inside it. That is strength. Not pretending the pain does not exist. Not becoming cold. Remaining steady while feeling it fully. Pressure reveals your level of training. That sentence applies everywhere. Failure exposes training. Loneliness exposes training. Stress exposes training. Rejection exposes training. Because pressure strips away performance. When life becomes difficult, people stop pretending. Now their true emotional conditioning appears. Some become reactive. Some become desperate. Some become emotionally unstable. Others become calmer. more focused, more disciplined. Why? Training. That is the difference. Most people think emotionally strong individuals feel less pain. They don't. They simply developed a higher tolerance for discomfort. That is emotional endurance. The ability to stay present inside difficult emotions without letting those emotions control behavior. That ability changes your life. You have a choice. Pain appears. Now what? Escape it immediately, or learn from it? Most people escape. That is why they repeat the same emotional cycles for years. Same relationship patterns. Same insecurities. Same emotional breakdowns. Same fear responses. Avoidance prevents growth. Because whatever you avoid emotionally usually becomes stronger psychologically. Avoid difficult conversations. Anxiety grows. Avoid rejection. Fear grows. Avoid discomfort. Fragility grows. That's why emotional avoidance creates emotional weakness. But exposure creates resilience. That's the key. The nervous system adapts to what it experiences repeatedly. If you constantly avoid discomfort, your tolerance decreases. Now small stress feels overwhelming. Small rejection feels devastating. Small criticism feels unbearable. But if you gradually stay present inside discomfort, your capacity grows. Now pressure affects you differently. This is why emotionally strong people often appear calmer during difficult situations. They trained for discomfort. Not intentionally at first perhaps, but repeatedly. Pain became conditioning. Think about someone building physical strength. Muscles grow through resistance, not comfort. Mental strength works the same way. Emotional resilience is built through emotional resistance. Heartbreak, loneliness, failure, embarrassment, uncertainty. These moments can either break you emotionally or train you mentally. You have a choice, and that choice often begins with one question. Am I trying to escape this feeling or understand it? That question creates awareness. Because most emotional suffering becomes worse when people panic about the feeling itself. They think, I can't handle this. This feeling is unbearable. I need relief immediately. Now emotional pain becomes emotional panic. But pain is survivable. That is important to understand deeply. Feelings pass. Emotions shift. Pain moves through the nervous system when you stop fighting it constantly. Emotionally disciplined people know this. That is why they breathe through discomfort instead of reacting impulsively to it. They understand something powerful. Temporary pain is often the price of long-term emotional strength. Weak people avoid temporary pain and create permanent weakness. Strong people tolerate temporary discomfort and create lasting resilience. That's the difference. This applies to uncertainty too. Most people emotionally collapse when outcomes become unclear. No guarantee. No certainty. No reassurance. You stop needing constant emotional expression. Now silence becomes easier, more powerful, more controlled. Because emotionally disciplined people understand that not every feeling deserves to be spoken immediately. Now fear takes control. But uncertainty is part of life. No one controls every outcome. Emotionally mature people accept this reality instead of fighting it emotionally. They continue moving forward despite uncertainty. That is courage, not fearlessness. Movement despite fear. Pressure reveals your level of training. Never forget that. Your response during uncertainty tells you everything about your emotional conditioning. Do you panic? Freeze? Seek emotional rescue? Or do you stay grounded and continue acting intentionally? That difference shapes identity. Most people want emotional strength without emotional discomfort. Impossible. Strength requires exposure. That's why emotionally disciplined people stop asking, "How do I avoid pain?" and start asking, "How do I grow through pain?" That shift changes everything. Now setbacks become lessons. Rejection becomes redirection. Failure becomes feedback. Loneliness becomes self-discovery. Pain stops being meaningless suffering. Now it becomes training. And training changes identity. You begin trusting yourself more deeply because you survived emotions you once thought would destroy you. That matters. Confidence does not come from easy experiences. It comes from evidence. Evidence that you can handle difficult emotions without collapsing. Evidence that you can survive pressure, loss, fear, embarrassment, uncertainty. That evidence creates emotional stability. Now life feels less frightening because you trust your ability to endure discomfort. That is real confidence. Not arrogance. Not performance. Emotional endurance. And emotional endurance changes your behavior under pressure. You stop reacting impulsively. Stop escaping immediately. Stop panicking emotionally during difficulty. Now you remain steady longer than most people can. That steadiness becomes power. Because emotionally resilient people are difficult to break. Not because they avoid pain. Because they trained through it. You don't need their permission. Not to heal. Not to grow. Not to become stronger because of what hurt you. Most people allow painful experiences to define them permanently. Emotionally strong people allow painful experiences to refine them. That is a completely different mindset. And over time, repeated exposure changes your nervous system. What once felt unbearable becomes manageable. What once triggered panic now creates awareness. What once destroyed your focus now strengthens your discipline. Pressure reveals your level of training. So stop asking life to remove all difficulty. Instead, train yourself to become stronger inside difficulty. That is emotional mastery. And once you stop escaping pain, something powerful begins to happen. Most people talk too much. Not because they have wisdom. Because they are uncomfortable emotionally. Silence makes them nervous. So they explain, defend, overshare, argue, prove themselves constantly. That behavior drains power. Controlled people do not rush to explain themselves. That's the key. Read that again mentally. Controlled people do not rush to explain themselves. Emotionally reactive people feel an urgent need to be understood immediately. Someone misunderstands them. Now they panic emotionally. Someone questions their value. Now they start proving themselves. Someone criticizes them unfairly. Now they desperately explain every detail. Why? Because silence feels emotionally threatening to insecure people. But emotionally disciplined people understand something powerful. Not every misunderstanding needs correction. Not every accusation deserves defense. Not every opinion deserves your energy. That awareness creates restraint. And restraint is power under control. Most people mistake emotional expression for strength. It isn't. Anyone can speak emotionally. Anyone can react impulsively. Anyone can defend themselves endlessly. Real strength is remaining composed when your ego wants immediate release. That is difficult. And difficulty is where emotional discipline is built. You have a choice. Someone provokes you emotionally. Now what? React instantly? Or remain calm enough to choose your response intentionally? Most people react. That is why they constantly create unnecessary conflict. Arguments escalate because people speak emotionally instead of strategically. One person raises their voice. The other raises theirs higher. One becomes defensive. The other becomes aggressive. Now nobody is communicating. Both nervous systems are fighting for emotional dominance. Controlled people do not rush to explain themselves. Why? Because emotionally stable people tolerate silence. That changes everything. Silence interrupts emotional escalation. Silence creates observation, space, awareness, and awareness prevents emotional mistakes. Most regret in life comes from emotional speech. Words spoken too quickly. Secrets shared emotionally. Anger expressed impulsively. Insecurity exposed unnecessarily. That is why restraint matters. Silence protects you from emotional damage created by temporary feelings. That's the key. Think about gossip. Why do people gossip constantly? Emotional insecurity. Gossip makes people feel temporarily connected, temporarily important, temporarily superior. But emotionally disciplined people avoid unnecessary emotional noise. Why? Because gossip weakens focus. It trains the mind to obsess over external lives instead of internal growth. And emotionally mature people protect their energy carefully. That includes conversational energy. Not every thought deserves expression. Not every emotion deserves immediate release. That understanding creates emotional power. Most people expose themselves too quickly. Emotionally, mentally, personally. Oversharing is often emotional instability disguised as openness. People reveal everything because they crave validation, attention, or emotional relief. But emotionally strong people move differently. They observe before revealing. Listen before speaking. Think before reacting. That patience changes perception immediately. People trust emotionally controlled individuals more because restraint signals stability. The calmest person often becomes the most respected person in the room. Not because they dominate attention, because they control themselves. That is real authority. You don't need their permission. Not to remain silent. Not to protect your peace. Not to stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. That lesson alone changes lives. Most people waste enormous emotional energy trying to convince others of their worth. Trying to prove they are intelligent, successful, good enough, right. But emotionally strong people understand something freeing. Your value does not increase because someone finally recognizes it. That's the key. If someone cannot see your value clearly, endless explanation rarely changes that. Sometimes silence protects dignity better than emotional persuasion ever could. This becomes especially important during conflict. Most people speak emotionally during arguments because they cannot tolerate feeling misunderstood. So they over-explain, repeat themselves, beg emotionally for validation. But emotional desperation weakens communication. Calm restraint strengthens it. Controlled people choose words carefully because they understand something important. Words cannot be taken back. Silence can always be broken later. That awareness creates discipline. You have a choice. When emotion rises, you can release every thought impulsively. Or you can pause long enough to ask, will speaking improve this situation, or only relieve my emotion temporarily? That question creates emotional intelligence. Most people never ask it. That is why emotional reactions damage relationships constantly. A single impulsive sentence can destroy trust built over years. One emotional outburst can permanently change how people see you. That is why controlled speech matters. Emotionally disciplined people understand timing. Not every truth must be spoken immediately. Not every emotion must become conversation instantly. That is maturity. Silence also increases observation. People reveal themselves constantly when you stop interrupting emotionally. Their habits, intentions, patterns, insecurities. But emotionally reactive people miss these signals because they are too busy talking, proving, and defending. You stop absorbing every distraction emotionally. Now your mind becomes less chaotic, less reactive, less overstimulated. Because emotionally disciplined people understand that peace requires protecting attention. Controlled people observe first. That makes them difficult to manipulate. Why? Because emotional silence creates clarity. You stop reacting automatically. Stop speaking impulsively. Stop leaking emotional energy everywhere. Now your presence changes. Calmer, sharper, more intentional. People begin feeling your restraint even before you speak. That is power. Not loud power. Grounded power. The kind built through emotional control. This also changes your relationship with attention. Most people talk excessively because they want significance emotionally. They fear being ignored, forgotten, unnoticed. But emotionally secure people do not constantly seek visibility. They understand something important. Attention is not the same as respect. In fact, people who constantly chase attention often lose respect unintentionally. Why? Because emotional neediness is visible. Controlled people do not force themselves into every conversation. Do not dominate every room. Do not emotionally compete for validation constantly. That restraint creates quiet confidence. And quiet confidence is powerful because it feels real. Most people are emotionally loud because internally they feel unstable. Stable people rarely need to announce themselves constantly. That is emotional security. Controlled people do not rush to explain themselves. Remember that. Not because they are hiding. Because they are disciplined. Discipline in speech. Discipline in emotion. Discipline in energy. That discipline protects peace internally. Because every unnecessary argument drains energy. Every emotional reaction drains energy. Every attempt to prove yourself drains energy. And emotionally strong people protect their energy intentionally. Not selfishly. Wisely. Over time, silence becomes easier. Not awkward. Powerful. You stop fearing pauses. Stop fearing misunderstanding. Stop fearing judgment. Now your words become more deliberate because you no longer speak emotionally just to escape discomfort. That changes relationships, leadership, communication, presence. Everything becomes calmer and clearer. And once silence becomes strength instead of fear, another transformation begins to happen. The modern world profits from your distraction. Your attention is constantly being pulled, manipulated, interrupted, and emotionally triggered. Notifications, opinions, arguments, comparison, outrage, noise. And most people never realize how much chaos they absorb emotionally every single day. That chaos becomes dangerous the moment it enters the mind. That's the key. Chaos outside is unavoidable. Chaos inside is optional. But most people allow external noise to dominate their internal state completely. One negative headline ruins their mood. One social media post creates insecurity. One online argument steals emotional energy for hours. Why? Because they never learned to protect their attention. Protect your attention at all costs. Remember that sentence. Protect your attention at all costs. Because attention is emotional energy. And wherever attention goes repeatedly, emotional conditioning follows. If you constantly consume outrage, your mind becomes reactive. If you constantly consume comparison, your mind becomes insecure. If you constantly consume distraction, your mind loses focus. That is not an accident. The modern environment is designed to overstimulate your nervous system. Constant information. Constant emotional triggers. Constant urgency. Most people live mentally exhausted because their attention never rests. And exhausted minds make emotional decisions. That is why emotional discipline requires simplification. Fewer reactions. Fewer inputs. fewer emotional entanglements. Clarity comes from elimination, not overload. That's the key. Most people think the answer to confusion is more information. Usually it is less. Less noise. Less distraction. Less emotional consumption. Think about how many people wake up and immediately flood their minds with chaos. Phone in hand. Notifications. News. Social media. Comparison. Opinions. Before their own mind even has time to stabilize, outside voices already control their emotional state. That is dangerous, because emotionally weak people consume endlessly without filtering intentionally. Now anxiety increases, focus decreases, emotional stability disappears. Protect your attention at all costs. Not everything deserves access to your mind. That includes content, people, conversations, environments. Emotionally disciplined people become selective with what they absorb. That changes everything. Most people underestimate how much emotional energy is wasted through unnecessary exposure. Doom scrolling, comparing lifestyles online, watching endless negativity, reading arguments that provide no value. All of this trains emotional instability, and emotionally unstable people struggle to think clearly. Why? Because overstimulation weakens mental control. The nervous system stays activated constantly. Now silence feels uncomfortable. Focus feels difficult. Stillness feels impossible. That is why many people cannot sit quietly for even a few minutes anymore. Their minds became addicted to stimulation. And addiction destroys peace. You have a choice. You can continue feeding your mind constant chaos. Or you can begin protecting your mental environment intentionally. That begins with awareness. Notice what drains your emotional energy. Certain people, certain apps, certain conversations, certain habits. Most people know exactly what destabilizes them emotionally, but they continue consuming it daily anyway. That is self-sabotage. Emotionally strong people understand something powerful. Peace requires boundaries. Not just physical boundaries. Mental boundaries. You must learn to say no to unnecessary emotional input. Not because you are weak. Because your focus matters. Protect your attention at all costs. That phrase becomes more important the older you get. Because attention shapes identity. What you repeatedly consume becomes your emotional atmosphere. Consume chaos constantly, and your inner world becomes chaotic. Consume calm intentionally, and your nervous system begins stabilizing. That is why emotionally disciplined people often simplify their lives over time. Not because they hate life, because they value clarity. They stop chasing constant stimulation. Stop participating in meaningless drama. Stop reacting emotionally to every trend, argument, or opinion online. Now their mind becomes quieter, and quiet minds think clearly. Most people cannot hear their own thoughts anymore because external noise never stops. Music constantly playing. Notifications constantly appearing. content constantly streaming. The brain never resets. That creates mental fatigue. Mental fatigue creates emotional reactivity. And emotional reactivity destroys discipline. Everything connects. That's the key. Your environment affects your nervous system. That means emotional control is not only internal. It is environmental too. If you constantly surround yourself with chaos, emotional stability becomes harder. This includes relationships. Some people are emotionally addicted to drama. Every conversation becomes conflict. Every situation becomes emotional intensity. That is the final stage of emotional control. Not perfection. Stability. A mind that no longer breaks under pressure because it has been trained repeatedly through discipline, awareness, silence, pain, and restraint. Every problem becomes exaggerated. Spend enough time around emotional chaos and eventually your nervous system adapts to instability. That is why emotionally strong people become selective with relationships too. Not everyone deserves access to your peace. That is emotional maturity. You stop confusing availability with loyalty. You stop tolerating constant emotional exhaustion just because someone is familiar. You begin protecting your energy intentionally. That changes your emotional state immediately, because clarity grows when chaos decreases. Most people try to find themselves while drowning in distraction. Impossible. You cannot hear yourself clearly inside constant noise. That is why solitude matters. Silence matters. Reflection matters. Stillness matters. Not permanently, regularly. Emotionally disciplined people create space for their minds to reset. No endless scrolling. No constant stimulation. No non-stop emotional input. Just clarity. That clarity creates emotional strength because it reconnects you with intentional thought. Now you stop reacting automatically to everything around you. You become more deliberate, more focused, more grounded. That changes your behavior completely. You stop needing constant entertainment. Stop chasing every opinion. Stop emotionally attaching yourself to every external event. Now your attention becomes controlled instead of scattered. And controlled attention creates controlled emotions. That is emotional mastery. Most people are mentally overwhelmed because they never simplified their inner world. Too many opinions. Too many distractions. Too many emotional entanglements. The solution is not more complexity. It is simplification. Fewer emotional battles. Fewer unnecessary conversations. Fewer distractions stealing mental energy. Clarity comes from elimination, not overload. Never forget that. Emotionally disciplined people learn to ask an important question before giving something attention. Does this deserve my mental energy? That question protects peace. Because not everything deserves access to your emotions. Not every argument deserves reaction. Not every trend deserves participation. Not every opinion deserves emotional investment. You have a choice. Protect your mind. Protect your focus. Protect your emotional state. Because once attention becomes disciplined, emotional stability becomes easier naturally. Now the mind becomes quieter, stronger, clearer, and clarity creates something powerful. Consistency. The ability to remain emotionally steady regardless of external chaos. Most people spend their lives trying to control circumstances. Very few learn to control themselves. That is why pressure destroys them. Not because life is impossible, because their emotional foundation is unstable. One difficult conversation changes their mood. One setback destroys momentum. One rejection creates emotional collapse. But emotionally unbreakable people are different. They train themselves daily. That's the key. Emotional control is a daily practice, not a personality trait, not a motivational feeling. A practice. Every chapter in this audiobook has pointed toward this truth. Emotional strength is built through repetition. Repeated pauses. Repeated discipline. Repeated restraint. Repeated awareness. Repeated recovery under pressure. That is how identity changes. Most people think emotional mastery happens during massive life events. It doesn't. It happens during ordinary moments. Traffic, delays, criticism, boredom, rejection, stress, silence. Small moments train the nervous system for larger moments. That's why emotional control is a daily practice. Every moment is conditioning you into either emotional strength or emotional weakness. You have a choice. Traffic frustrates you. Now what? React emotionally or train patience? Someone criticizes you unfairly. Now what? Collapse emotionally or remain grounded? Plans change unexpectedly. Now what? Complain impulsively or adapt calmly? These moments seem small. They are not. Small emotional habits become personality over time. That is why emotionally weak people often feel controlled by life. Because they never train themselves consistently in ordinary moments. They waited for motivation instead of building discipline. Waited for certainty instead of building resilience. Waited for easy conditions instead of training under pressure. Emotionally unbreakable people stop waiting. That is the difference. They understand something powerful. Life will always contain uncertainty, discomfort, loss, pressure, criticism, pain. Always. Trying to eliminate all discomfort is impossible. Training yourself to remain steady inside discomfort is possible. That changes everything. Emotional control is a daily practice. Never forget that. Most people want emotional stability without emotional responsibility. Impossible. You cannot allow every mood to control behavior and still expect a stable life. Your emotions matter, but they cannot become your leader. That's the key. Emotionally unbreakable people still feel everything. Anger, fear, disappointment, loneliness, stress. The difference is simple. They remain functional while feeling it. That is strength, not emotional numbness. Emotional regulation. Most people think strength looks aggressive. Loud voices. Dominance. Intensity. No. Real strength looks stable. Calm under pressure. Measured during conflict. Disciplined during difficulty. Focused during chaos. That is rare. And rare qualities change lives. Look at the people who constantly lose control emotionally. Every problem becomes emotional panic. Every disagreement becomes personal attack. Every delay becomes frustration. Their nervous system never rests. That creates exhaustion. Emotionally unbreakable people protect their nervous system differently. They slow down before reacting. Breathe before speaking. Observe before deciding. Why? Because they understand emotional speed creates emotional mistakes. That awareness creates control. Control creates stability. Stability creates confidence. Not fake confidence. Real confidence. The kind built through evidence. Evidence that you can handle difficult emotions without collapsing. Evidence that you can remain disciplined during stress. Evidence that you can survive discomfort without escaping immediately. That evidence changes identity permanently. Now you trust yourself more deeply. That is emotional security. You no longer panic every time life becomes difficult. Because difficulty no longer feels unfamiliar. You trained for it. Emotionally unbreakable people understand another important truth. Peace is protected, not accidental. You must protect your attention. Protect your energy. Protect your standards. Protect your mind. The world constantly tries to pull you into emotional chaos. Arguments, comparison, negativity, distraction, outrage. Weak minds absorb everything. Strong minds filter intentionally. That filtering creates clarity, and clarity creates emotional stability. That's the key. Most emotional suffering becomes worse because people refuse to simplify their inner world. Too much stimulation. Too many reactions. Too many unnecessary emotional battles. Emotionally unbreakable people simplify. Fewer arguments. Fewer distractions. Fewer emotional entanglements. Now the mind becomes quieter, and quiet minds become stronger over time. You don't need their permission, not to become calmer, not to protect your peace, not to outgrow emotional chaos. Most people remain emotionally trapped because they continue surrounding themselves with instability, unstable habits, unstable environments, unstable thinking. Then they wonder why their emotions constantly fluctuate. But emotionally strong people build structure intentionally. Daily habits, clear standards, controlled environments, disciplined routines. Structure protects emotional stability. That is why disciplined people often appear calmer. Their life is not controlled by emotional randomness. They built systems stronger than their moods. Every difficult moment trains panic or stability. Every emotional challenge trains avoidance or resilience. Choose carefully, because eventually, the person you become will be built from the emotional habits you repeated the most. That changes everything. Emotional control is a daily practice. Again and again. Every morning. Every conversation. Every stressful moment. Every difficult decision. Practice. Not perfection. Practice. You will still make mistakes. Still feel emotional sometimes. Still experience frustration. That is normal. The goal is not perfection. The goal is recovery speed. Emotionally weak people stay emotionally trapped for days. Emotionally disciplined people recover faster because awareness interrupts emotional spirals early. That recovery ability becomes powerful over time. Now setbacks stop destroying momentum completely. Criticism stops controlling your self-worth. Pressure stops creating panic automatically. You remain steadier. And steadiness is power. Remember this clearly. The emotionally unbreakable person is not the loudest person. Not the most aggressive person. Not the most intense person. The emotionally unbreakable person is the most stable person. Stable during uncertainty. Stable during criticism. Stable during pressure. Stable during discomfort. That stability changes leadership, relationships, decisions, confidence, everything. Because emotional stability creates behavioral consistency, and behavioral consistency shapes destiny. Most people spend years trying to change outcomes without changing emotional habits first. Impossible. Your emotional patterns shape your behavior daily, and daily behavior shapes your future. That is why emotional mastery lives completely. You become harder to manipulate, harder to distract, harder to destabilize. Not because life became easier, because you became stronger internally. That is the final lesson. Strength is not aggression, not dominance, not intensity. Strength is stability, the ability to remain grounded while the world around you becomes chaotic. The ability to feel emotion without surrendering control to it. The ability to protect your peace, standards, focus, and discipline regardless of circumstances. That is emotional mastery. And emotional mastery is available to anyone willing to practice it daily. You have a choice. Every reaction trains weakness or discipline. You now understand something most people never learn. Emotional control is not about hiding emotion. It is about refusing to become a slave to it. Every chapter in this audiobook pointed to the same truth. Reactive people lose control of their decisions. And once decisions become emotional, life becomes unstable. That is why discipline matters. That is why calm matters. That is why silence matters. That is why emotional endurance matters. Because every difficult situation in life will eventually ask you one question. Who is in control right now, you or your emotions? And the answer to that question will shape your relationships, your success, your confidence, your reputation, and your future. So from this moment forward, stop reacting automatically. Pause before speaking. Slow your breathing. Control your inner voice. Protect your attention. Stay steady when others panic. Train yourself to remain calm in situations that once controlled you. Because emotionally weak people are controlled by circumstances. Emotionally strong people control themselves regardless of circumstances. And that is the real power most people never develop. Now take these principles into your life and prove, through your behavior, that your mind belongs to you.